Hello friends, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Danny and today I'm going to give you guys some Chonky Series recommendations for fantasy beginners. Within the last 2 months, I've kind of gotten away from my roots, gotten away from my chunkier reads because I've started a new job, and I have also been co-hosting a readathon, a competitive readathon that I felt like in order to keep up, I needed to be reading some shorter books. And so coming into March, which I know we're not there yet, but in preparation for that, I just wanted to get my head back where, you know, my home is, my loves are, which are chunky reads. And so I thought, what better way than to recommend to you guys some chunky fantasy series. Now, I have looked through my fantasy series that I own and those that I don't own and tried to look for books that I thought would be good for beginners, because I know a lot of people who are getting into fantasy probably, you know, stray away from chunkier reads because they're a little intimidating. If you are new to the fantasy genre, it can be quite daunting to get into these massive worlds. And so I tried to choose some that I think are very accessible. And by that, I don't mean simplistic, but I mean that I don't think that they throw everything at you. I think that the authors do a good job of, I don't want to say hand-holding, but a little bit of guidance for people who are entering into these books. And so I do think that if you are not a fantasy reader, but you do typically like bigger books, that these might be ones that you enjoy. I also would say that if you are a fantasy reader, but you avoid chunkier reads, I think these are a good place to start too if you would like to try your hand at chunkier reads. I think that they're all amazing. I'm going to give you guys 5 series recommendations and 1 honorable mention that I'm just a little nervous to call a beginner level fantasy, but I want to mention it nonetheless. I do have categories for each of these, and so I will put timestamps down below if you guys want to check out the different categories and figure out which one suits you best. The first 2 that I will start with are actually ones that I think people argue about whether or not they're YA or adult. I believe that both of these are adult fantasy novels, but I can see people's arguments for them being YA at times. So if you are also a YA reader and you are looking for an entryway into adult fantasy, I think that these 2 are also just amazing. We're going to start with a series that I think is for people who are interested in learning different magic systems. So if you are looking to get into fantasy, to see what authors can create with different magics, I think that the Founders trilogy, which starts with Foundry Side, is absolutely perfect for beginners. This does have a complex magic system in it, but I think that Robert Jackson Bennett does an excellent job of describing what the magic does and how it impacts the world. The reason I think that a lot of people will say that this one, especially the first book, is YA is that our main character, Sanjia, is very young and she's very snarky. And so I think sometimes her dialogue, her actions, her immaturity, I guess, at times can come off as a little bit YA, but I think that she grows throughout the story, and the gang of characters that ends up around her throughout the storyline is just absolutely phenomenal. I love Robert Jackson Bennett's character work. To give you a little bit about this book, you start with Sanjia, who is a thief, and she has some unique abilities that make it very easy for her, or easier for her than it is for other people, to steal artifacts. And she is requested to steal something that's very important to some very powerful people. And she takes the job because it pays well, but gets herself into a little bit of a pickle and involved in political dynamics that she did not want to be involved in. Throughout this story, you learn about her past, and the people surrounding her. The artifact that she steals ends up being very important to the powers that be. And if they get their hands on it, it could essentially change the shape of the city that she's in. It does have something to do with the magic system at play, which I talked a little bit about, the fact that I do think the magic is done really well in this. To give you a little bit of a sneak peek, The magic is called scribing, and scribing can give life to inanimate objects. And so if you have a wheel, you want it to move, you can scribe it to think that it's rolling downhill and it will move of its own volition. So this entire city is built on scribing. You can make stone actually hold more weight than it should with the scribing by making it feel more powerful. There's a ton of things that are described in this that are just absolutely phenomenally created with the world building. And because of this magical object that she has stolen that someone wants to get their hands on, she has to figure out, she has to argue with herself, for one, does she want to get involved, even though she knows if she doesn't, she is dooming certain aspects of the city to the hands of people that she doesn't necessarily trust. And there ends up being a gang of people that she comes into contact with, all separate entities, but they all have their own reasons for wanting to help. And I absolutely love this. It is a trilogy, so if you end up enjoying it, you have plenty more to read. I think this first book, the reason I call this chunky is I do believe it's over 500 pages, but let me see. Yeah, it's just at 500 pages, so 503. But I think it's worth every minute. The next one I'm not going to hold up, but I will just point it out. It's in a collector's box, and it's a pain in the butt to get out of the collector's box, but this is the Darker Shades of Magic series by V.E. Schwab. So I'll put up a picture of the first book in the series so you guys know what book I'm talking about. But this one is another one that people do argue whether or not it's YA or if it's adult. I think it's adult, but I understand because of the characters, especially Lila Bard, why people would try and classify it as YA. But I think that makes it a good transition from YA fantasy into adult fantasy as well. In this world, I'm going to say that this is for the people who really want world building, because V.E. Schwab doesn't only world build for one magical kingdom, which is London. It's set in London, but she world builds for 4. There are 4 different Londons in here. Think multiverse that all coexist at the same time. And Schwab has to figure out a way to let you know how each of the worlds exists, how the people inside each of the Londons live, all in one book. Because you figure out the world building happens in the first book. Obviously it's expanded into the trilogy, but I do really think that the world building in this is just astounding. The fact that each of the worlds, they're classified by colors. So you have white London, red London, black London, and gray London, and they all have their own different personalities and characteristics that are very apparent by the end of the book. Obviously in the beginning, you're stumbling a little bit to try and figure out why there are all these different worlds and which people you come into contact with are in which worlds. I just absolutely love this series. I think it's a lot of fun. It does have a cool magic system in it as well. It's not quite as complex as the one for Foundry Side. So if you're a little worried that Foundry Side is the magic system in Foundry Side is going to be a little bit too much for you, Darker Shades of Magic might be a good one for you to try. This also has some amazing characters in it. We follow multiple POVs. You have one of our main characters is called Kel, and he is an Anatari. I'm probably getting that name wrong. It's been a minute since I finished this series, but he essentially is someone who can travel from world to world, so London to London. And most normal individuals just live in one of the Londons without ever seeing the others, but he has a specific power that allows him to go between worlds. You learn the history between the 2 worlds, or between the 4 worlds, and how they used to coexist and now they're shut off from one another. You learn why. You also have Lila Bard, who is a sassy, fiery character who I just dearly love, and she does run into Kel and they end up traveling together. And you learn about her past and why she is the way that she is. I dearly love these characters. The overall story is about you figuring out how the worlds coexist or used to coexist, and now why they're shut out. There is a villain in the storyline that is trying to change the dynamics of how the world works, because you do learn that there are some differences within the worlds that I'll just say that people want to change. I'm not going to go into super details because I don't want to spoil anything for you guys, but yeah. I should also say that the original trilogy, the Darker Shades trilogy, has a companion series or a sequel series that came out. It started last year. It was either in 2024 or 2020 or late 2023. I'm pretty sure it was 2024. The Fragile Threads of Power is the second series, I guess, and I absolutely love it. It's one of my favorite books of 2024, and I can't wait to see where V. Schwab goes next. So if you end up loving these characters, loving the world, there's plenty for you to continue with. We've talked about magic systems, we've talked about world building. I want to go into our next series and talk about the play with POVs and the kind of a unique viewpoint on how to world build. And that is with the Bone Shard Daughter. This is the Drown Empire series. I always get it wrong. Is it Drowning Empire? Yeah, the Drowning Empire series. It is a trilogy, again. Lots of trilogies for you guys today. But this one, you do have 5 different POVs, and they are all in different locations in this kingdom, the Drown Empire. And it is an island kingdom, and the main character, or one of the main characters, you really have 2 main characters and then 3 kind of side characters that you get as POVs. But the main character is the Bone Shard Daughter herself. So she is the daughter of the Emperor. She has memory issues. She cannot remember how to use her powers or her past, and her father will not give her the power to rule unless she can master the Bone Shard magic. And so she's desperately trying to figure out how to get her memories back and how to use her Bone Shard magic. And it's dark. This first one has horror components in it. I think that the darkness of the first book does dissipate as the story continues, because this first one has quite a bit of a mystery in it that you are trying to solve, whereas the other 2 books are just developing the kingdom after you have solved the mystery of the first book. So I do think that the first book is my favorite. But the reason I wanted to recommend this to beginners of fantasy is because one of the huge aspects of fantasy is world building. And I think that there are so many different ways for authors to build their worlds. V. Schwab with Darker Shades of Magic had 4 different worlds that she had to build all within one book. And within this, you have one world, but 5 characters that are all placed in different locations that help you get a full global view of this kingdom. And I just thought it was a really interesting way of building a world out and building a magic system, because all of them also have different viewpoints on the magic. You have our main character who is literally knee deep in it. She is supposed to be able to actually control the magic because she is part of the royal line, whereas some of the other people in our story are just citizens of the kingdom, and so they just get to see the actual bone shard constructions, which are very creepy. And there is you learn very early on that the bone shard magic is taken from shards of bone, like behind people's ears. They take a shard of bone from people when they are very young in the kingdom. Everyone has to go through this process of having this bone removed from their skulls, and those bone shards are used to control these constructs. But the problem with that is anytime they are used, they drain the life force of the person they came from. And so there are obviously some animosities towards the emperor and his family using the bone shards, because it can cause people to die younger than they should. And so you have that political dynamic going along with it. But seeing all of the different characters in this, you get to feel what they feel and in their particular place in society. I will also say that within this story, since it's called the Drowning Empire, you do have some of the islands or one of the islands very early in the book goes underwater and you don't know why. That's one of the mysteries that you're trying to solve in this. You're also, because of the fact that there are several POVs, you're trying to figure out how they all fit together in the kingdom. And I think it's really, really fun, and it is mysterious. It's probably a little less hand-holding than some of the other books that I've talked about so far, but I do think that it's a really interesting peek into fantasy. The next series is for dystopian lovers. So if you are someone who maybe you really enjoy sci-fi and you have enjoyed dystopian worlds as well, but you would like to introduce yourself to a fantasy book, maybe some creatures, some fantastical creatures within dystopian worlds, I'm going to give you the Winnowing Flame series, which starts with Ninth Reign. I have absolutely loved. I've only read the first two. It's a trilogy. I've only read the first two, but I've loved what I've read so far, and I can't wait to continue. I'm actually rereading the first two with Kirsten halfway through the year. I think we're going to do it in June. And I can't wait to get back into this. You follow three main characters within the story, and they are in a world where some things are happening that are indicating some historical bad things. And one of the characters you're following is a scientist. And so she knows some of what is happening is wrong, and there's something wrong with their world, but they don't know the implications of that, because historically speaking, all of the things that are happening have been in the minds of I can't remember what their race is called, but there is a kind of an elven race among these people, and you do follow one of them. And he is of a race that lives not immortally, but they live a very, very long time. And so the history behind these events that are now happening that are foreboding of bad things, his race kind of held the history of that and knows what to do. But his race is dying out. There are some things that have gone wrong where there has been a plague, for lack of a better word, amongst his kind, and he is one of very few remaining people. And so some of that history has been lost, which means they are not as prepared for these events that are happening as they should have been. There is some animosity between his race and humans because of some events that happened in the past. Those events also have an impact or have led to the plague that is happening. And so it's a very interesting dynamic to look at from his perspective, but also the people who he comes into contact with. And you have our third character, who is a fell witch, which, if you don't know what that is, it essentially means that she can use people's life force to create magic, but that kills the people. And so people fear her. She is in prison at the very beginning of this, but she does escape. And these three people, so the scientist, the fell witch, and the elf, that's not what they call them, but I'm just going to call them an elf for lack of a better term, essentially go on an adventure to try and figure out how to save the world. And there are these mythical beasts that get involved. You learn about why the world is doing what it's doing as you're going through the storyline, and it's just, some of the reveals were really good. The characters are amazing, and I don't hear enough people talking about this. So I do think that this would be perfect for people who do like dystopian worlds, but want a little bit of a sprinkling of fantasy maybe in your stories. The last series that I have for you guys is for the character-driven readers that I have in the audience. So if you are someone for your main genres that you absolutely love, character development and learning about a character's life, the nitty-gritty details that make them who they are, I think that this series might be a good place for you to start in the chonky realm of things, and that is the Rare Revelations. I absolutely love this. The two men in this story, Hadrian and Royce, are rough and gruff, but the impact that they have on each other's lives and their actions throughout the storyline, I think, just really shows how much they care for one another. And you get to see and hear some flashbacks. I was gonna say backflashes, flashbacks, and You get to know why they're making certain decisions. I really enjoyed the story. If you haven't heard of The Theft of Swords, so this is, I'm cheating a little bit calling this chonky because this is actually 2 books bound up into one, but I don't know that they sell them individually anymore. And so I'm calling this chonky because it's a chonky boy if you read The Theft of Swords, which is book 1 and book 2 in the Raya Revelations. You are following Royce and Hadrian, and they are hired to steal something. And they don't realize that in contracting that job out, that they are actually getting really heavily involved in kingdom politics. So I would also say that this is a book for people who like political stories. If you are a fan of historical fiction and kind of getting into the nitty-gritty of why kingdoms make certain decisions, I think that this lends itself well to that as well. The world building in this is also really cool. They do develop the kingdoms in such a way that you kind of feel like you're there, even though obviously it's a made up kingdom. But I think the shining stars of this series are the characters, not only the 2 men, but also the side characters that you meet along the way in their adventures. It's just, I absolutely love it. There's also the Raya Chronicles that was written after the Raya Revelations, and that is Hadrian and Royce's origin story. So if you do read this and you're wanting more, Royce and Hadrian, first off, there are 6 books total, but 3 bind-ups that they have 2 books each in the Raya Revelations. But then there are also, I think it's 5 books. I haven't got through all of them yet, but there are 5 books in the Raya Chronicles that talk about the origin story of Royce and Hadrian. So you could start there as well if you're not wanting a chonkier read. I recommend reading the Revelations first because there are little Easter eggs in the origin story that I have really enjoyed, but I don't think it's necessary. So if you would prefer to read the shorter books first, get Hadrian and Royce's backstory, and then jump into the Raya Revelations, I think that you could do that as well. The official last series that I'm going to give you is an honorable mention because I do hesitate to recommend this to beginners because there isn't a lot of handholding in the fantastical beasts that are introduced in this series. However, I think that the journey and the characters, the banter, I think that anyone can enjoy, even if you don't understand the fantastical creatures that are introduced. So if you are familiar with maybe fantasy movies or Dungeons and Dragons, that type of thing, then this might not be a big jump for you. But I'm going to recommend The Kings of the Wild. This is the Bands series. I'm not sure how many books there will be currently. There's only 2 published, and the 3rd one I think comes out this year. But in this first book, you are following a group of men who are essentially mercenaries, but they call themselves bands. And they go out and hunt monsters because in this society, you have civilization where humans live, and within the outskirts of that, you have some forests and deserts and things where monsters live, and sometimes they encroach on human civilizations, and so these mercenary bands will get hired to make the lands safe again. And these men used to be in a mercenary band called Saga 20 years ago. They were known to be one of the most infamous bands out there, and they have since retired because they're old or older than they once were, and so they don't want to fight monsters anymore. They just want to live their lives. And one of the men in the band actually comes to the rest and tries to get the band back together because his daughter is in a really perilous situation and he wants to go and save his daughter. And so you follow these men in their journey of getting the band back together and doing things that they used to do when they were young. The banter between the men, the kind of familial bond that you see in the past of where they were and where they are, how they've kind of separated, is really lovely to see, and the humor in this is just absolutely astounding. So those are my chonky fantasy recommendations for beginners. If you guys are beginners to fantasy and you decide to read one of these, please let me know what you guys think, and if you feel like they were a little overwhelming or if they were perfect for an entry level into fantasy. I hope that I don't have my crosshairs aimed in the wrong direction, because I really do think that these would be great for people who are not familiar with the fantasy genre to get a little bit of a taste of what fantasy beholds for you guys if you do continue in the genre. I would love for you guys also to leave your chonky recommendations for fantasy books for beginners in the comments down below. I would love to curate a list for people just to come to this video and be able to find some big books that are still accessible to the beginners of the genre. I would love that. If you're not feeling chatty, just leave a sword emoji for Kings of the Wild so I know that you're here. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you have a lovely evening, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!